Hello everyone, my name is Samantha and I am a PhD candidate in art history at the University of Toronto. Today I want to provide a glimpse into my research approach and a quick tour of my current project. I am an art historian by day and a classical musician by night. My research combines the best of both worlds. I study the curation of artists' identities and ask the question, why do painters portray themselves as musicians in the 16th and 17th centuries? In order to engage in critical analysis of art objects related to my project, much of my time has been dedicated to tracking down relevant self-portraits and painter studio scenes. Unfortunately, there is no comprehensive catalog of musical self-portraits in existence. As a result, I spent many hours scouring museum and gallery catalogs and databases. While there have been numerous publications on this topic, my job as a researcher is to revisit and verify the analysis of each painting. This task is easier said than done. Many surviving artworks move in and out of public and private collections. One of the most interesting parts of my job is keeping an eye on auction houses and catching paintings during ownership changes. For example, the work you see on the screen is a 17th century painting titled A Painter in His Studio Tuning a Lute by Peter Cody. The last time this work was seen in public was 1949, and as you can see, this black and white photograph does not do the painting justice. Last year, just as the world was entering into lockdown in March 2020, a colleague texted me a photograph and asked, "Isn't this one of the paintings you've been tracking?" Somehow, after 71 years in hiding, Peter Cody's painting reappeared at TIFAF Maastricht. I was ecstatic and promptly contacted the Swiss art agent and dealer, David Kotzer Gallery. The gallery was generous in sharing their recent color photograph and a report about the painting. Even though the painting resurfaced, I noticed that the work had suffered over time. For example, the image hanging on the back wall is now gone, and the details of the canvas stretched over the easel are barely visible. Because of the corpus of what I study is not considered major works, many surviving paintings are not well preserved. For example, I struggled to see the details in this yellowy photograph taken by the Gemäldegalerie Gallery Altemeister Dresden of the Liefhebber visiting a painter's studio by Franz von Mieris from the mid-17th century. To help me decipher the visual details, I consulted the lithograph at the Wellcome Library. By examining the painting and lithograph together, I can generate a better analysis of the work. Engravings and prints capture details that may have been lost to time, although I still recommend that when possible, go see the actual work in person. For example, a large section of my research focuses on musical self-portraits of women painters. Now, do you remember the whole viral dress debate? Black and blue or white and gold? Well, there's a similar, albeit smaller, debate on a 1577 self-portrait by Lavinia Fontana. Most publications and websites show this image of Lavinia's self-portrait. The painter is seated before a keyboard wearing a red dress. Imagine my surprise when I attended the exhibition A Tale of Two Women Painters, Sofonisba Anguissola and Lavinia Fontana at the Museo del Prado in 2019 and saw Lavinia Fontana wearing a pink dress. What happened? Take colors with a grain of salt. Many factors affect color, from paint loss to varnishes to dirt to lighting, and the list goes on. When you cannot visit the work in question, consult multiple catalogs, databases, and publications, and contact the museum or gallery. You never know what you will find. While surviving artworks are primary sources that chronicle musical activities inside the painter's studio, documentary evidence such as biographies, letters, diaries, and inventories gathered through archival research generates a more thorough understanding of the musical lives of artists. Inventories indicate the type and location of musical instruments within the painter's home. For example, according to his 1636 inventory records, Peter Cody kept an old lute and violin in his studio. We can see that the old lute is precisely the lute that the figure is tuning in the painting that we saw earlier. Jan Mincy Molinaire's 1668 inventory reveals that the artist kept a violin in his painting room and 3 lutes, 2 transverse flutes, and a kit violin nearby. These instruments show up time and time again in Molinaire's self-portraits and painter studio scenes. Visual representations of music were not always accurate. And some visual artists were known to create imaginative pseudo-ancient instruments and scores, such as Hieronymus Bosch's Butt Song. The intersection of art and music allows for the incorporation of interdisciplinary research methods to uncover the many nuances embedded within the surviving objects and texts. In my work, historical musicology generates a dialogue with art history through critical analysis of shared language, such as the word harmony and proportion. The sensory turn of the 1980s has seeped into the field of art history, and concepts such as intersensoriality and synesthesia allow art historians to extend beyond looking at, but listening to painting. I like to end this tour with this painting titled Lute Playing Painter in the Studio by Johann van Swiete. The museum that housed the painting was closed for 3 years in 2016 for restoration and expansion. When the museum reopened in late 2019, I rushed over to Leiden to experience the work in person. The trip was worth it. I spent the better part of a day just standing in front of the painting, taking notes and making sketches. A lot of undergraduate art history courses ask students to participate in slow looking. I cannot stress enough the importance of spending time with the artwork that you're studying. Take the time to observe and absorb the work slowly. When analyzing self-portraits, I like to think about our contemporary selfie culture. When you take a photo of yourself, how do you want others to see you? Before there were photos and selfies and hashtags, the best way to take a photo of your face was to paint yourself, as Johann van Swiete has done here in the self-portrait of 1655. The painter is depicted playing a lute, adorned in his finest clothing and gazing upwards thoughtfully. Johann's left elbow rests on the table where his palette and paintbrushes are carefully laid out in the same form as his lute. As I mentioned earlier in this tour, my research project attempts to answer the question, why do painters portray themselves as musicians in the 16th and 17th centuries? Hundreds of self-portraits were created throughout Europe. Self-portraits function as a form of self-promotion, literally a visual resume. So why did Johann present himself as a musician in his visual resume? To answer this question, we need to think about how painting and music were perceived at the time. In the Renaissance, painting, unlike music, was not a liberal art. The echoing of musical instruments and the painter's tools placed painting on par with the educated and intellectual activity of music. But why is Johann gazing upwards? The answer lies with the missing element in this musical self-portrait. Sheet music. Where is the sheet music? Over 80% of paintings with musical subjects depict sheet music. However, amongst musical self-portraits, I discovered that over 80% do not have sheet music. This means that painters made a conscious decision to exclude printed music from their visual resume. The lack of sheet music is associated with 2 musical skills, memorization and improvisation. The greatest artists in history, such as Michelangelo and Titian, were noted for their formidable memory. Our man Johann presented himself as a musician so proficient that he did not require any sheet music. He looks upwards as he recalls music from the past and receives inspiration for new compositions. The analysis of Johann's self-portrait relies on critical analysis of the painting, archival research, and interdisciplinary research methods to understand the artistic, musical, and intellectual climate of Johann's time. How is all of this relevant to our daily lives? Well, the next time you take a selfie, think about what stories you are telling and leaving behind. Thank you.